Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I got to talk to Dorian Varovic for the first time. He is a PhD candidate for exercise science, and he's been doing some great research in the field. He's been involved with 10 publications to date, and actually has some new research coming out that hopefully on the time of listening to this podcast, it's going to be out there, where they explored the first study that ever looked at isometrics along muscle lengths versus full range of motion. It's never been looked at. A lot of people like to say isometrics don't lead to any growth. What did they find? So we dive into that, also digging into what actually got Dorian into the field in the first place. What was his first training experiences? Why didn't he compete in men's physique when he thought he might do, and much more on that case. And then we also talk a bit more about the pump, how that relates to hypertrophy. Can that be used as a short-term proxy? And then just more about regional hypertrophy, and also that relationship with training at lengthened partials or training at long muscle lengths versus full ROM. Are there regional differences? What did Dorian find? And just diving into all his research and his background. It was a really fun chat. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this. Dorian's doing a great job on his social media. I talked about it a lot during the episode, but I'm going to give it an extra shout out now. So that's going to be linked in the description, so you can follow him over there. This podcast is brought to you by MacroFactor, the smartest nutrition app on the market. Think of it like MyFitnessPal, but supercharged. It outperforms it in every single way. You just enter your details and goals, log your food, and wait. From there, MacroFactor fine-tunes your plan automatically, giving your body exactly what it needs to stay on track and reach your goals, without the guesswork. If you ever get paralysis by analysis and end up guessing what nutrition you need, you'll dig MacroFactor, as it will give you the science-backed targets individualized to you and your goals. Plus, it will adjust your calories just like a coach on a week-to-week basis to keep up with the changes in your metabolism. So ditch the outdated apps and get with the times. Download MacroFactor today and use my code STRONGER to get 2 weeks completely free via the App Store or Google Play, or find it linked in the description below. Now with that said, let's get into today's show. Dorian, welcome to the show. It's great to be chatting to you. This is the first time you're on. I doubt it'll be the last time, though, because I've been really enjoying your content as we're talking off air. In an age where people are frustrated with science communication, whether or not that's founded in kind of good reasoning or not, I don't think they can hate upon the way that you're doing it, because you're doing great work over on Instagram with your infographics, which I've seen. Obviously, you've been working behind the scenes on various research topics and things like this. So thank you for what you're doing. And I do want to dive into a bit of background behind you. So I don't know that much about you. I know that you have working towards your PhD in exercise science at the University of Zagreb in Croatia. And I read off your kind of primary interests. So I'll read off primary interests. Resistance training as it relates to strength and hypertrophy, plus supplements impact on performance. And ideal person to be talking to, really. And I know you've been on or involved in 10 different publications, from caffeine and paracetamol on power and velocity, muscle length's influence on hypertrophy. And so I'd love to just dive into what led you here.
Awesome. And again, as we talked about briefly off air, but thank you so much for having me on. It's a really great honor, and thank you for all your work that you've done throughout the years. Again, I mean, I really do appreciate it. And yeah, basically, to keep the long story short, I don't like talking about myself too much. But basically, I'm a PhD candidate in Zagreb, Croatia. I'm studying, my primary PhD topic is the effects of muscle lengths on regional hypertrophy. But yeah, throughout the years, I've delved into some caffeine and sodium bicarbonate research. Sodium bicarbonate one was for my master's thesis project. And we recently, just this week, we had the Advanced Bodybuilding Techniques review paper out in Strength and Conditioning Journal, which was a really great honor to collab with really fantastic work of a group of authors there. So that was really a fun and amazing experience for me. I've let's see. I have a master's, so I have a master's degree in kinesiology from Zagreb in Croatia, Faculty of Kinesiology in Zagreb, Croatia. Kind of what led me to research is basically, when I first started off my uni journey in the first semester, there's a introduction to systematic kinesiology coursework that we kind of to an extent familiarize ourselves with the methods of scientific methods, essentially. So this was my kind of first introduction to kind of systematic searches and what science actually is and how scientific method works, and that's before then I didn't actually kind of think about science. I was just lifting. I've lifted for several years. I planned on competing in men's physique, and that was kind of my goals at the time. And then when I entered uni, the kind of focus shifted just a tiny bit, I was kind of starting to get interested in, okay, how do we know what we know? How do we learn more about a particular topic, and some of my first naive topics were like exploring whether we can define, as I was really interested in bodybuilding at the time, like, can we identify genetic potential in bodybuilding? Is there any kind of gene expression or polymorphisms, and besides the MSTN gene for muscle mass, and potency to grow, or kind of kinetic analyses of different exercises, the kind of those newbie questions, but that were kind of essential for me to start off, and kind of kick off my journey there. And basically at the end of my first year of uni, I actually contacted Brad Schoenfeld to conduct my first real study, and I was fascinated with drop sets. So that was my first project that we carried out in my second year of uni, which is kind of, for a second year student, kind of a big project to run a 10-week intervention. And we basically carried out drop sets versus traditional training study on untrained participants. And yeah, that was basically it. From then on, I was kind of hooked. I really wanted to study more. I really enjoyed the process of kind of coming up with hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, conducting research in itself, and then just kind of writing about it. And yeah, the rest is kind of history. That led me to my PhD today.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool, and interesting to hear that you were looking to compete in men's physique before you even started working kind of to go into university. Were you already in university when you?
No, before.
Kind of interested?
So I was kind of working out at that point for several years, 3-4 years at that point. Okay. And I just finished off a cut in 2000, end of 2016, start of 2017. I finished off a 10-month cut, and then I got really sick. I got some health issues that I've developed throughout the way, and that basically stopped me, plus I've started uni, and those two combined I had to put the thought of competing on a back burner for a while, and then, uni kind of obligations and stuff, and I never kind of went back to that. Perhaps one day, but as you know, kind of competing itself is, a really selfish sport and selfish process to go through.
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't combine well with a PhD.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I know a lot of people I've spoken to on here who have delayed competing and things because they are going towards getting that
even
PhD.
Working out is sometimes, a task. I didn't go through, when I did the last study, I haven't worked out in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I just had my kind of hands full, and I've just decided, I'm not going to lose muscle substantially, even though some do claim, but I'll
days, mate, days,
days, yeah. But fairly acknowledging that I'll just get it back as soon as I'm back in the gym and eating and sleeping properly, and yeah,
sure. In regards, sorry, I mean, let me know if you are comfortable divulging health issues. Sorry to hear you had those. Are those resolved now, or
no,
where are you?
Basically, I'm kind of managing those throughout since then. So since 2017, before that, I didn't basically have any health issues. And then for whatever reason, honestly, I've developed like constant like GI issues, like IBS plus something like along the gastritis, or I don't know, basic, really bad like acid reflux. And in combination, it's like always the GI sort of related. And when I'm under stress, it gets even worse. And basically just the sheer thought of competing, and kind of dropping my body fat, and just, you're in a heightened few weeks out before the show, you're in a consistent state of stress, so that doesn't basically kind of work, So I know some people kind of manage, and I can manage, but at times it gets so bad. It's like no food, no training, like zero function basically throughout the day. So until if that ever resolves, or if I kind of manage or successfully manage that, competing is basically off the table. I can get lean, and I'll still work out. But, even if everything is perfect, there's just some days that I wake up and I'm like, fuck, I don't know if I can curse, but...
Yeah, I mean, you've heard Dr. Mike on here, right?
so basically,
dude, I'm sorry.
It's good. I've kind of, I have some prescription, for when I need it, but basically kind of just learning
antacids and
what?
Antacids?
Yeah.
Like omeprazole and
Yeah, basically that plus some the antispasmodics for the GI, and that's kind of how I'm managing stuff, and it's good. When the diet is better, when I'm not completely off track, it gets better. No surprise there, but I do have to be mindful of the kind of food I'm eating and my kind of habits throughout. But basically just stress management, keep a proper diet, keep a proper like hydration status and sleep regimen, and kind of try and work out 3 times a week to kind of, put on as little muscle as I can, and just micromanage one day at a time.
I was going to insert a carnivore diet joke.
Yeah, no.
Because that's the solution, apparently.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I'm like, honestly, if that was the kind of the solution all end, I'm not doing that. Like, I don't find myself, as with my clients, I do not kind of, if you cannot stick with it for like the rest of your life, don't do it. It's just basically, I don't see the even need to kind of, if it's going to be some kind of a temporary fix, and as soon as I'm back to my ordinary like habits, like back to square one, I don't see that happening. So yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
but it's all good, man.
It makes me think of the question you had on genetics and genetic potential, and a lot of people don't realize there's so much more to muscle growth than like just that simple. How much muscle could you potentially put on paper? Yeah. You probably heard, if you listen to the podcast kind of regularly, I get digestive issues when I push body weight up. I'm sure that's handicapped me somewhat to my muscular potential. I'm not sure. I like to think that I can kind of work around it, and certainly gaining slower this time around has helped, and staying leaner. But everyone has their kind of problems, their drawbacks, but that's a pretty major one, because when I get into those situations where I've got acid reflux, sleep is then really not great. Yeah, you wake up fatigued.
Terrible.
Stomach, if you're bloated, you can't go train, you can't put a belt on, there's no axial loading.
Yeah, basically.
All of those. Yeah. That sucks, man. I'm sorry, but hopefully we'll see you on the men's physique stage at some point. What got you initially interested in like men's physique training? Was there any...
Because I was too small to do bodybuilding.
Yeah, sure.
But no, basically before that, I was like kind of I'm a musician. I was kind of, my whole life was music before kind of delving into training. And I got into training like early high school, and kind of, what goes on with like music lifestyle, drinking, smoking, like all of the bad habits you can do, I kind of did. And then basically my health status, like a teenager even, wasn't, that great. But combined with all that, I don't see why it could be and how it could be. But then gym really, kind of training really helped me out. I got less sick. I felt good. I looked good. It was like improvement on all possible levels of, self-improvement. So I was really hooked on that feeling, you know. And then slowly throughout the years, also the kind of a thought popped up as I was training in a local gym, bodybuilding. You know, I've started off with six-pack shortcuts at home, like Mike Chang's, all of the
I almost bought
workouts.
that.
Yeah, and I almost did as well. Thank God I didn't have any money at the time, and the afterburn effect, all of the ab workouts, and that then I've kind of enrolled into gym, and it was like classic, you know, all of the guys there were kind of bodybuilding circles, so we were kind of Arnold. I went through basically every single possible bodybuilding.com program available then. So I did like Arnold push-pull leg, blueprint to mass, like 12-week program, like 6 weeks, 6 days a week, like kind of pushing as a newbie. Just kind of imagine the sheer amount of volume. I remember recently I found my old notes, and I was doing like 45 sets of back work per week as a 2-year-old, like 2-year experienced lifter. Like, what the fuck? Then I did like Jim Stepani's. Recently, he was a guest on Mass. That was like a whole fucking awesome episode, you know, kind of to listen back to, and like. He was a really one. I did both a shortcut to mass, shortcut to size, and Chris Gethin's like 6 weeks to something. You know, they always had something like in the title 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So, but basically, I've done them all, and yeah, I've put on some size. You know, I've drank Rich Piana's like mass, mutant mass, like just downing the. Protein shakes, you know, and ingesting like 250, 300 grams of protein per day, which is like fucking absurd, you know. But I've done like a lot, you know, as I've like was hanging out there on forums, Reddit, bodybuilding, like subforum was my like daily, you know, piece of content that I've kind of delved into. And then, yeah, basically that was kind of the thought of competing, and then just this kind of self-improvement level just led me to, hey, perhaps I can do this kind of, if it helped me so much, so immersively throughout the years, and I felt so much better, why couldn't I help someone else achieve the same, you know, the same amount of fulfillment at least. So, and my kind of whole motto was at the start, and still is to this day, if I can help just a single individual achieve and get out of basically just training to the same extent that I did and got all of these positive things in life from it, I'll be happy, you know. So yeah, that's basically
I love that. Yeah, I love knowing that that's your kind of objective with this.
Yeah.
Again, I think, especially in today's day and age with social media, people think that someone like yourself who's kind of young and getting their exercise science PhD and in this field, it's like, oh, you're just doing that because it's going to be a marketing shill. Like,
hey, look, I'm almost 30, so
sell programs.
I'm not that young, you know, I'm almost 30. So I've been here for a while. Just started. I'm a late adopter to the social media game.
Good for you. And do you actually, and that leads me to think actually, post PhD, do you already have like plans of what you would like to do?
No, you know how things go with uni and kind of academia world. It's kind of in the air, you know, with that regard to that. I do coaching. I still coach in person, actually. So I do like half of the week. Let's say half of a week. I do in-person coaching, and I do online coaching. So plus create content, plan research, and that's basically my life, you know. So yeah, probably just continue on building up the, you know, whatever social media is going to amount to. I don't know, you know, but kind of still, I enjoy coaching, honestly. You know, I really do enjoy coaching, and I particularly I thought about like completely switching to online coaching, but I enjoy in person. You know, I can do some things that I kind of have to do some twists and turns of, and kind of compromises with online. It's the matter of communication at the end of the day, but still, in person, I can do it on the spot at the like exact time and, you know, kind of put it straight to the client. And I really do enjoy that. You know, it's kind of also the interpersonal relationship you build to a more, perhaps a more certain degree. You know, you kind of get close to the person a bit more versus strictly online. So yeah, basically doing both for the time being.
Yeah, I think doing both is really great if you have a good setup for that. It's hard to juggle at times, I think, for some people. And I think certain characters just do better with one or the other. If you're a bit more extroverted, or I guess it's like you get your energy from other people. Whereas if you're a bit more introverted, like you're good behind the screen. Like it's all right.
I like to think of myself as a kind of adapted extrovert, you know, to extent. I like being on my own. I kind of like the feeling of the safe space of the room. And yeah, but at the times, I kind of throughout the years and the more experience I got with in-person coaching and meeting other people, it's like I kind of open up myself to the experience and kind of, I enjoy doing this.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I do agree with you as well. When you can be one-on-one with a client, like it is interesting though. I've met clients who I've worked with for months to years and then met them in person. It's like, you imagine meeting someone for the first time. It's like a bit of a weird, like, I don't know, blind date, but it's not. It's like you've known them and it's like, hey, this is just, you just talk to them like they're a mate. It's so strange how you can build that sort of relationship online, but it really deepens it. So if we have like get-togethers or I go to a show, it deepens that bond.
Yeah, and also it really does depend because I've seen, you know, you can do coaching the good way, mediocre way, or the bad way, you know. I really invest my time. I really want to get my clients to appreciate me. I want them to know that I appreciate them trusting me and being confident in me, leading them to their goals, you know, and kind of helping them achieve the goals that they set out to do. And basically, so yeah, I'm there. Send me a message, I'll respond. Check-ins, video check-ins weekly. You know, I'm not gonna kind of, you know, put you. Yeah, I'll get back to you. No, you're getting a response. You're getting your weekly check-in. I'm asking you how you've been. Well, you know, I'm just kind of, just give me information, you know. As long as you provide me with information, that's this, I can return back, you know. That's...
You care. And that's what sets true coaching apart from just like following a program or an app, or like you can use whatever you like to give you numbers and to give you direction, but having that person in your corner who you can ask questions to, cares about your results, that's the true coaching element. So like you said, the videos for me, video check-ins, interesting you have that too, because they're completely necessary to keep that communication channel effective.
For, you know, at times, at days, you know, depending on the client, depending on which stage at the coaching they are at, you know, if they're at the start, you know, some check-ins are going to last, you know, longer. It's going to last longer because your time investment in completing that, like a comprehensive detailed check-in video, it's going to take longer than you just saying a voice memo or a thumbs up or a few messages on the spreadsheets, you know. That I don't believe in that. Perhaps in the later phases of the coaching, you know, when the client is more autonomous in the process, knows a lot, there are less changes throughout the mesocycle or throughout the microcycles, you know. But at the start, when they're kind of basically, you know, lost and everything is new, I kind of just want to help them. And, you know, I always say that they're the conductor, and I'm just kind of helping them lead the way, you know, kind of to not let them astray. And that's basically it.
Yeah, I always use... Analogies are great, right? I always use the analogy of like being a walkthrough guide to like a console game. It's just like, I'm just helping guide you. That's awesome. And it's great to hear about your background and obviously where you're looking to go in future. I mentioned the 10 publications. Out of interest, are there any that stand out to you as like, that was just like my favorite for whatever reason? I'd love to hear. If they don't, then don't worry. I have another question coming.
I mean, every piece of publication is kind of like it's kind of like a single piece of how much I've progressed or what I've learned or what I didn't learn, you know. And it's kind of just every single step of my kind of learning process, you know. I'm getting better. I frequently collab with Jozo Grgic, who did a lot of work for strength and hypertrophy and caffeine research. You've certainly run across his studies throughout the years. Amazing researcher, and basically he said to me when I started off, he said that writing and reading and interpreting research is basically a skill set. You just have to put in the time. You just have to put in the reps if you want to get better at it. There's no way going around it. If you don't write, you won't get better. It's just trial and error. You can see one approach that I did, especially at the start. I kind of put out place throughout my screen the papers that from the authors that are perhaps even native one. For example, Brad's papers, and I would just look at those, how the phrases, sentences were constructed, kind of what words do you use in kind of scholarly academic writing, and that was kind of how my approach to learning things, and just kind of trying remembering that, oh, this could fit, and just trial and error, to kind of building off the introduction, why you even do a specific topic, kind of think of it as the inverted pyramid. You kind of start off from the general and build to the bottom, or more specific, or hypotheses, goals, aims of the study, and then the discussion is kind of reversed. You kind of start off with the specific and kind of build out, into widen out from the more specifics. But basically, to your question, if there is a single one, I don't know. If it's the more recent one, I can say that is the latest one on training technique, just because it's like fresh off the cuff. But again, every single piece of that research that I've had the opportunity to do is really it's special to me for, was it the first study I ever did? Was it the first supplement study that I ever did? Was it the first meta that I ever did? Kind of. It all of them have just a tiny little specifics to them that makes it special to me. So kind of, yeah.
I can totally see that. Yeah, I know you mentioned the advanced training techniques. Kind of, it's not a systematic review, I don't think, but it's like a summary of the data and kind of practical applications. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing. I'm hoping I can get hold of it, actually, because I don't think I could get hold of it
send me
where
a
I
message,
was looking.
and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, if you can send it, that would be a great hookup. But I was planning to bring on the lead author. I just started following the lead author, and he
Adam
seems like a great individual, so I was going to get him on to talk about it. But is there anything you took from that
Lengthened
paper
partials.
that was... Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more
basically,
about it.
So this was a narrative review, and Dr. D'Souza kind of put it nicely, like meta-analyses and narrative reviews do have kind of a expiry date to them, to extent. Yeah, they just do. A good RCT doesn't. It's just a piece of the data in the time that you kind of aggregate in later synthesis of the currently available evidence in a meta-analysis, umbrella review, meta-regressions, whatever, But with that said, with all of the techniques that we've covered, drop sets, supersets, lengthened partials, pre-exhaustion pyramid, there was blood flow restriction training, rest pauses / my reps. We kind of tried to really synthesize all of the available evidence, including acute and longitudinal studies, and kind of just provide our best recommendations on how to implement them within a concise training program for each of the training technique. And my role was to kind of write about lengthened partials, as it was a topic that's a part of my PhD, essentially. So nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that the listeners or readers are not well aware of yet. So basically, just kind of laying out the ground that we have just a few studies, like 5 studies on the partials, lengthened partials versus a full range of motion at this time. That the effects are kind of uncertain to a degree, it's not that certain that's as was getting portrayed online and on social media. I'm kind of more on the cautionary side of the claims. Just perhaps they work, perhaps it's the same, perhaps it's can go both ways. It's really uncertain. Even though effect estimate kind of trended, it's the quote unquote trended, and that's toward partials, lengthened partials being better than full ROM. The confidence intervals spanned both sides of the null. So, there's a high degree of uncertainty whether lengthened partials are truly better to full ROM. But also, so kind of just presenting, all of the Pedrosa studies, all of the Cassiano ones, mentioning the recently published papers by Stian Larsen and colleagues for lengthened supersets. So basically, we gave the recommendations of that if one wanted to perform lengthened partials in their training, there's a few routes one can take. So one would be just performing a whole set as a lengthened partial. The second option would be perhaps to extend the set with lengthened supersets, as it call them. I just call them post-failure partials, whatever. And when you think about it, drop sets and lengthened supersets or extended partials, whatever, it's basically the same gist of it. It's kind of the set extending technique. You're kind of just aiming to accumulate a bit more volume, and with the hope of that additional volume begetting additional growth, basically. And let me see if I missed something. But I think that those two applications are perhaps the most worst in kind of a standard program. I think I also mentioned the kind of from the Pedrosa one, you do one session you do a full ROM, and the second session you do like a partial. But from the kind of practicalities standpoint, I don't see myself or with any kind of client doing that. What the kind of rationale behind of that is on weekly basis, your average time spent at longer muscle lengths is still greater for the longer length condition than compared to the shorter length condition. But it's for the sake of standardization, kind of continuity. I just stick with the first two, in my opinion. How do you still do partials? Do you do them with clients? How has your kind of view of them shifted in the last few months?
Yeah, just before I answer that I don't know if you included this, and I think it's an old John Meadows technique, is 1.5 reps.
No,
so you do like a full ROM, and then you do half, and then you do a full ROM. So integrated partials, I think Casim has called them.
I don't think, we didn't actually discuss those, but because they're basically, we try to kind of stay away from practical, kind of extrapolations, what we do, what we might do in like real world scenario, and just stick exclusively with what we have available. We didn't even go into mechanisms, and kind of speculate on why. We just wanted this to be like a go-to practical kind of a spreadsheet or a cheat sheet for, potential, physique athletes or competitors, that you can use them, but use them wisely, use them sparingly, and be cautious of, kind of their efficacy or lack of a better word,
This is what I really love narrative reviews for, because as a practitioner, they're a gold mine, because it just kind of gives you the nuts and bolts of what you might want to apply with your clients. To answer your question, for me, I have been using exclusive lengthened partials for my calves for a long time now, just because that's where most of the data was, and it was pretty convincing to me. So I was just like, hey, my calves haven't grown that much for the longest time. And I've said several times, my calves have, like, I actually look at my calves, I'm like, I'm kind of proud of what I've got there now. Like, they look all right. So that's quite nice. So they've definitely benefited from that. And then anywhere really in my program where I can get more lengthened exposures, that's what you said. That's where I tend to use them more. So whether or not I go full ROM into partials or just use lengthened partials full stop, it kind of, I go bit by feel and what feels right or wrong at a time. What I will say is, for example, I was doing lengthened partials on leg extensions, but I got some patella tendonitis, not from that explicitly, but I was getting some. So I was just like, hey, I'm going to go full ROM, going to do the superset style, let it drop off, or post full ROM partials, basically. So I mix and match a little bit. For my calves and back, though, they're pretty exclusively lengthened partials, just because very convinced by that. And I guess lateral delts as well, pretty convinced that that's a decent application for it.
Yeah, I gave a recommendation that when considering which exercises perhaps make sense to include lengthened partials in or on is some back movements, you know. So basically all of the exercises that are probably the hardest in the shortened position, and just doing partials, you can accumulate a shit ton of more volume by just sheer partials, you know. But then again, that brings me back to the standardization thought that I have, and kind of I find myself kind of these days doing just a full ROM plus extra partials following the failure, and that's basically it.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, like, I think it was viewed as a game changer, and it's like this thing that's gonna make your growth suddenly just shoot up. But it's like, it's like full ROM was working for a long time for a reason, and I haven't seen like dramatic changes in my back from doing it. I mean, it's quite a big change for me, but I don't think it's definitely not made things worse. And that's kind of what I come back to. You mentioned it, where it's like it's kind of trending towards lengthened partials being better. It's not worse. So I'm like, especially at my level,
it's not worse. You know,
it's like I risk it if it's not even really a risk. It's kind of a very calculated one.
At this point, we do not have any kind of studies that would suggest lengthened partials to increase any kind of like risk in kind of injury or to an extent, you know. So if you're abiding by all of the principles of kind of gradually progressing and not going overboard in kind of just, you know, because a lot of the tendonitis stuff that can creep up for people is just due to doing too much too soon. That's basically the way it goes. So if you kind of just keep that in mind and kind of control, I think you'll be good, you know.
Yeah. Awesome. So the thing I wanted to see what we could cover with this, because you kind of mentioned it via direct messages, was this sneak peek of a new study.
Yeah.
So this was the first ever study to explore isometrics at long muscle lengths versus full ROM.
Yeah.
How much can you tell us about that, Dorian?
Honestly, I don't know. We can try. It's in peer review at the moment.
Okay.
We didn't publish it as a preprint. So we're going traditional route with this one.
Was there, it's just out of interest, a reason you decided that?
My supervisor insisted on this, kind of just abiding by the book, kind of the old-fashioned, you know, academic. You know, there are some inherent limitations that people are not aware of with publishing preprints. Some journals, for example, do not accept preprints, and you just cannot publish with them anymore. And basically, because we had no funding for like covering the open access fee, the pool of possible journals that we can submit to that are, you know, kind of good, respectable journals in the field is getting, you know, smaller by the day. A lot of them are kind of shifting from the more traditional subscription-based models to APC paying a handful of, we're talking thousands of pounds or euros for a single paper. And you know, that was kind of his thought process was, why should we kind of make it hard for ourselves to lower the pool even more with already low enough studies, possible journals that we can submit to, and basically that was the decision why. And I respect that, and it's basically it's in review, really good journal at this point, and we had some favorable feedback from the first round. So fingers crossed, man. When this episode hits, possibly could be out or at least accepted, but we'll see. But to keep I say long story short, but then I keep on blabbling and yapping for 20 minutes. if you think about it, and I'm sure you've seen this throughout the social media and perhaps throughout the years, that people would say that isometrics don't build muscle, or isometrics are inferior to traditional dynamic resistance training. And I was recently tagged by Pac in one particular person's Instagram, and I was in London at the time, and when I got the comment from someone, just you don't even look like you lift, why should we care, like do you have any kind of muscle, like like isometrics is kind of bullshit, you yada yada yada. And I'm like, okay dude, just chill, kind of cool. Because isometrics actually, if you look at the studies that we have, it's not much, but if you look at the studies that directly compared isometrics to dynamic or dynamic / isotonic, including both concentric and eccentric portions of the lift, they did grow muscle. They did grow comparably well to dynamic regular resistance training exercise. So just the sheer fact that people are spitting out that they don't grow muscle, that's basically not true. Even more so, if we go back into the muscle length literature, a lot of the claims that were for kind of preaching lengthened partials are being extrapolated from isometric research. And if you compare strictly isometrics at short versus long muscle lengths, the effects did favor, like, were greater, hypertrophy was greater or equal or greater with long isometrics at long muscle lengths. Okay, awesome. So the next step is basically asking, if we compared isometrics at long muscle lengths versus a full range of motion training, do we see greater hypertrophy exclusively with isometrics at long muscle lengths or comparable hypertrophy? And that was basically the kind of catalyst for the study, the idea. And also, since I'm looking into the aspect of regional hypertrophy, so how does the isometrics at long muscle lengths versus full ROM compared to full ROM have the effects on regional hypertrophy of the quads? So that's kind of if I got my point over across.
Well, I have only a couple of things to say. One is the whole argument of why should I listen to you? You don't look like you even lift is just so awful when you just look at like the top Olympian pros and you look at their coaches. Like, it's just such a, like, when you look at any coach of like a top athlete, it's always like, if you look to the coach, you'd be like, well, I didn't think you were anything special. And you look at the athlete, it's like, yeah, it's because you don't have to, like, how you look doesn't determine how good of a coach or how good of a researcher or knowledge base or anything like that. So it's terrible.
I can see it why, because of all of this science-based TikTok kids and all of the trends that have been popping up everywhere. I can see why people are kind of getting pissed off by everyone and just saying, and I've seen the comment somewhere, someone said, these days, the ones that are more jacked are perhaps even know more or kind of are better coaches in themselves than just those abiding by science. But we all the listeners of this podcast probably do realize that those science-based are actually not science-based.
Exactly.
But to kind of, what can I say? So we did a 6-week study, and this is going to be like, even 8 weeks is already bad. You did a 6-week study. That's even worse. But 6-week study in resistance trained males and females, well trained, 4+ years of resistance training. They were well trained, and like, believe me, majority of the sample was really well trained. Like, we had some experienced professional rowers that passed professional roles, like training for 10+ years, really strong guys. So we did the ultrasound of quads, of the medial, like the anterior thigh and lateral thigh, so rectus femoris and vastus lateralis composites. 6-week training study, 2 times per week, they did like gradually increase their sets throughout the intervention. So they started off with 3 sets, 4 sets, and ended off with 5 sets. So 10 sets in total per week. And training was performed on isokinetic dynamometer. And there was one particular like reason for that is because it's really, if you think about it, it's really hard to equate for conditions. And that's probably the reason why there's not a lot of direct research on the topic, because kind of I've talked with Daniel Plotkin on this like a few weeks back, but it's kind of a really hard question to fully isolate in itself. And there's no right or wrong way of going about it. In a sense, if you equate for one thing, you're kind of losing on the other one. And what we kind of wanted to, the approach we took here was to kind of equate for total kind of time under tension, because if you think about it, in isometrics, you do not have any displacement. So you do not have work, you don't have the work as the outcome. So basically, only thing we could have done is kind of equated for their total time under like tension or contraction, whatever you kind of want to phrase that in your mind. But basically, that the effort that they exerted throughout the set duration was kind of equated for both conditions. And so they did the isometrics condition did the pushing isometrics at maximal knee flexion angles versus full ROM doing just the standard isotonic protocol of contraction, controlled concentric and eccentric muscle actions. And I think
sorry, Dorian, was it an in-subject design? Was it one leg doing one approach?
One leg did one conditions, the other leg did second condition, and that's kind of increases the power, helps out a ton. And I don't know if I covered basically, is there anything else important besides the methods? For the methods, I don't think there is. But basically, after 6 weeks, we found comparable hypertrophy between the conditions. And there are some, potential regional aspects of it for mid-thigh, but nothing that I would kind of put much stock into, as consider it, this is a first study on the topic, like literally first one. And first, you basically know this as well. First studies in the field tend to kind of have inflated effect sizes or kind of less inflated effect sizes. And then as the evidence builds up, you kind of get, the bell curve kind of shapes up nicely. But with that in mind, I know I've thought about all of the critics and all of the comments that are kind of coming our way when this hits. But if we really, this was kind of designed as a proof of concept study. Can actually isometrics work? And yeah, they can work. Yeah, they can work, and they can work fairly to a fairly similar extent as dynamic training. Just a matter of kind of prescribing them as you would with kind of any kind of other exercise that you would do in the gym. It's the matter of volume, it's the matter of intensity, it's the matter of kind of rest, all combined into the holy trinity, I call them, and the frequency, so. But so yeah, comparable hypertrophy. And it's really funny that our study as a proof of concept one was really hard we made it hard for ourselves to kind of, present. If we really wanted to make the case that isometrics work or were better, we could have just picked untrained participants straight out of the gate, probably would have been a really robust response to training in both conditions, probably fairly more in isometrics one, and that's basically it. So I don't know if you've seen, we published why we even did the study in the first place. So this study is the second project for my PhD. Basically, the first one being the recently published systematic review and meta-analysis on the effects of muscle lengths on regional hypertrophy data published with Brad Pack, James Steele, and Joza Grgic, and my supervisor Pavle Mikulic. we basically found that there doesn't seem to be a regional response to muscle length training, which is kind of surprising, because we planned this study, this intervention, before we even had the analysis done for the meta-analysis. And I was kind of surprised by that, because if you take a bird's eye view of the literature, or just a simple, which is a bad way of doing it, but a simple vote counting approach too, and if you pick apart each individual study, it would seem that slightly greater distal growth is reported in individual studies when doing training at longer muscle lengths. And when this hit, when we finally had the meta-analysis results, and then this one, those do kind of align. Both do kind of align. So similar hypertrophy throughout the regions. We even found a slightly greater in proximal, actually, than the distal one for the mid-thigh measures. And this is interesting because it goes into the perception of the pump that we kind of just didn't collect, but collected, which is just kind of cool. We can talk about this briefly later on, but yeah, so basically a huge limitation of the current studies for range of motion, or rather muscle lengths and regional hypertrophy, is that if you compared short condition and longer muscle length conditions, their average difference between the conditions in muscle length was only 21 to 22%. So that's basically, in my mind, that's probably too small of a difference in average muscle length for any kind of noticeable effect to be seen throughout the studies. One caveat being that we also performed additional models, subgroup analyses, for if you manipulated muscle length via exercise selection or via range of motion, the effects kind of did strengthen at distal points for range of motion. So if you did kind of lengthen partials, perhaps the effect is kind of greater, but the caveat still being, average difference between the conditions in current studies is really small, and the effect, is kind of uncertain as well. So, yeah, I think that basically covers both studies now. I've kind of briefly jumped all over the plate, but let me know if you perhaps have any additional questions for this or the other one.
The regional stuff is interesting because I think that was a case a number of people, I think, were making for why you should maybe do some like short bias training, because the long muscle length or length and partial training is just going to like grow your distal. So you want to get holistic growth, so you should do some short length partials or short bias training or full ROM. But it's quite interesting to actually know that. And to me, it makes sense that there isn't so much regional difference, just because, I don't know, muscles just seem to be good at adapting to whatever they're given, and they're going to grow to adapt with it. And
one more thing with that is actually you have to think about, when discussing regional hypertrophy, we're basically always talking about a single slice or a single measurement point along the length of a muscle. So distally, it would normally be 60 to 70% from like the origin, or the insertion point. It can go both ways depending on, but basically a lot of the studies do report, if they delve into regional hypertrophy, they would report one proximal measure, one mid belly, middle site, and one distal site. And the thing is that when discussing regional hypertrophy, some muscles taper. Measurements can be way off. So, for example, in pennate muscles, they can be vastly different than in like when the fibers go longitudinally than in non-pennate muscles. Then there's also the case for if you compare muscle thickness to cross-sectional area to whole muscle. Do those measurements actually align or do not align? And there was a recent paper by Sam Buckner that I think he compared like cross-sectional area of the quads versus muscle thickness of the quads, and those kind of did not, kind of align the whole. I think they induced like substantial swelling, if I'm not confusing the two papers, but the amount of like acute swelling was different between the cross-sectional area and muscle thickness. So it makes you wonder, can you actually aggregate the studies that use different methods? And I know he talked about, but on your podcast and other podcasts, but do we also consider the variability between labs or within labs, and how accurate and the positioning of the probe kind of, is it the same? Is it consistent? How accurate are the measures for each of the muscles? It gets a bit more granular than people realize and appreciate when discussing all of these things. And in the end, the dose regional. So if I had, for example, 10% greater increase in distal area, 5 in mids, and 3% in the proximal, how does that amount to home muscle, like muscle volume? Because if you take a look at the supplementary materials from the Myo ones for the hamstrings, and I think there is also for the triceps one, the cross-sectional area and muscle volume data does not align. There's just slight difference between the two, so I'm kind of blanking on the directionality of one versus the other, but you can go and check for those interested. But it also begs the question, well, what's the practical actual use of kind of regional hypertrophy data that the way we measure it, So yeah, bunch of kind of questions that kind of go way deeper between just, I've got 5% more growth in distal region. Yeah, okay. Then what? Does that accumulate throughout time even more so? Does that amount to me winning a show? I see the use case and I see the practicality, and that's why the topic interests me. If you can kind of sculpt, if you think about bodybuilding as a sculpting, you're an artist, you kind of like to sculpt your delts, you like more growth here. And Arnold always said, it's you want a little bit more peak, you do this, and that's what regional hypertrophy is. But if you think about it, we don't actually even know what drives regional hypertrophy per se, as confidently as it's being, kind of measured. We're kind of inferring as greater activation, but what does that activation actually mean? Is there any kind of other thing we can measure regionally that would be a better proxy or better indicative of the growth? A whole lot of other questions and tangents I'm going on now that I'm kind of sidestepping, but yeah.
Oh, it reminds me of what you were saying in regards to like standardization for length of partials and that sort of thing, and being sure that you have an element of standardization, so that, hey, the logbook improving is not because you're even shortening your range of motion even more and you're actually getting stronger, what have you. If the data isn't standardized or the way you collect it, it's like how it's apples and oranges that you're suddenly comparing, and it's now no longer particularly useful. And also it reminds me of what you said at the start in terms of the data or rather the 10 publications you've been part of, and you're just learning as you go how better to kind of understand it from I'm strictly a practitioner. Yes, I will read some research and things, but by no means do I try and kind of do it at the level of like the mass research review. Like I leave that to them. I read their interpretation because I understand what I don't understand.
Yeah.
And similar here, where you've just dove into all of that nuance there. And it's like most people who aren't in research aren't going to understand that level of depth that you do and can appreciate. And so if they're just pulling one study to prove a certain point, it's like, man, that's really not very helpful.
Yeah, and that's the biggest issue with social media in itself these days, kind of cherry picking just one study from the plethora of studies available on the topic or lack thereof, and the more it's so kind of cringy, but it does hold true. The more I learn, the less I know, and I panic. Every day I panic just a tiny bit more, because I'm like, how can I even say no? I feel less confident the more I know in shit ton of things. It's just the never-ending black hole. It's just kind of the hole you keep digging, and is there a way out? probably not, you know.
Yeah, I know how you feel. It's reminds me, if people are interested in like having that feeling, they probably many of the listeners have it, but they read your post on the primer on mechanical tension and hypertrophy. Your like take home at the end was the exact mechanism by which mechanical tension leads to growth still isn't fully understood. And it's like, and I read through the entire post, and there's a lot to it in terms of all the kind of mechanoreceptors and the ones we don't know about. People speak so confidently, black and white. Super simple, guys. It's just mechanical tension.
It's just tied in. It's just, you know, yeah, it could be, but it's probably not, you know. I kind of, these days, I find myself more operating in uncertainty than ever before. I thank James Steele for that and making me more black-pilled than ever, as he'd say. But, you know, I'm questioning more, really more, and experience with him. He's a really great person, a really great educator, and just chatting with him and getting to work with him on this project was really an eye-opening experience. With all of the authors that I've had the chance and opportunity to conduct research by now, but James, because I've interacted with him so much over the several, half a year or so last year, I learned so much. I really did, and I'm kind of bummed because I didn't get the kind of opportunity to listen to him or had the opportunity to, take classes or be at the university where he spoke. I've really learned a lot, and he kind of showed, kind of put a thought in my brain, just kind of don't overthink it, don't kind of be wary, be cautious, about question basically everything. And it's basically, they joked about it on a recent mass office hours when he was a guest, but they said something, Trex, I think, said something along the lines, nothing works. Yeah, for James, nothing works, basically. Just, kind of live, and basically after a year, nobody grows anymore.
Actually, that's something people might, the recent study you mentioned where you're looking at the isometrics at long lengths versus full ROM and mentioning like 6 weeks, how much growth would an advanced lifter of 4+ years expect to grow in that time? Could that be why there wasn't significant difference? Because it's just like, well, there's never going to be that much growth in the first place.
Probably to an extent, I'd say that there was like, in terms of like effect size magnitudes, the difference between conditions was like fairly like small, trivial to small. So any kind of differences, even though they were, for some measurements, they were above the measurement error for the technician that did the ultrasound measurements, but still, those that was for like 2 or 3 measurements out of all of them that we did, and basically, for the rest, the estimates were within the measurement error. So it could be just noise. It could be there's a possibility of it being some effect in favor of isometrics, but who knows? There's a lot of studies that need to be, ran in the future, and we hope kind of this to be the catalyst for those, whether it be for my PhD, for the rest of the studies that I'll do, or someone else. I just hope, that anyone delving into this specific research can kind of build up off of this one, and that's basically what we kind of want one take-home message to be from this one. And if the reason that they didn't grow is, it could be just 6 weeks. It's just, too little of a, too short. Or it could be just the volume that they did. Perhaps, some participants detrained, they performed great.
Sure.
You have to take that into consideration. And if someone's going to be listening to this and then after that reading the paper, kind of just what I've said here, keep in mind, keep in mind the limitations section that it's like a book. I've really wanted to be as transparent as possible in the in that one, and kind of, be fully open to, this is a possibility. This is a possibility that it could have influenced the results, and just be mindful of it. Let's try and design another study that builds upon this one and go from there. Just be cautious of the claims.
I'm already predicting a social media post that someone's going to title, "Look, isometrics at long muscle lengths grow just as much muscle as full range of motion training."
Yeah, for sure. That one is coming for sure. That there's no way that's not happening.
Before we go, Dorian, I definitely want to touch on this because you mentioned a few times the pump, and the pump is very close to my heart, as probably many of the listeners. And I know from some of your posts you've teased on this large-scale project where you're looking to summarize acute proxies for hypertrophy and how effective they are for long-term growth. Probably a whole episode in for itself, I imagine. But talking about the pump, at least, might be interesting. So I'd love to hear what you maybe have found with that one.
We didn't find much yet. So this is a project that's been going on for a while now. We started off, I contacted Eric Helms last year, or 2 years already now, because I was interested in kind of, it ties into the regional hypertrophy aspect of it, but considering if we can perhaps predict hypertrophy, if we can use some kind of an acute proxy for to see whether one exercise is better than the other, and would that amount to better growth over time, it would be a really, cool thing to have, a really cool tool at your disposal as a coach, as a athlete, just basically to not waste your time. If you see one exercise being giving you a greater stimulus compared to the other, just stick with it, just stick with that one. That's the kind of the stimulus to fatigue ratio, but it does tie into that. The concept does make sense too. And basically, when I reached out to Eric, I've learned that Eric has a PhD candidate from Japan, Takahiro Itagaki, that is kind of planning on doing his PhD on the very topic of finding acute proxies, practical proxies of muscle hypertrophy. And then we were kind of chatting, and it thought it'd be best to kind of just combine, combine forces. And the project evolved so much. We moved from just like non-invasive proxies, so SMG and the muscle swelling, or T2 MRI, or muscle deoxygenation, to also the invasive proxies. So, your GH, testosterone, your muscle protein synthesis, lactate, all of the kind of blood markers of whether some of those do kind of correlate and have any kind of meaningful use case in predicting hypertrophy long term. And as I said, this is a whole topic for another episode in itself. But regarding to the pump, or regarding to the muscle swelling, I made a post on it recently that people kind of confuse the two, or kind of use the two simultaneously, and that's just not it. Kind of muscle swelling is just kind of acute expansion of the, let's say, increase in muscle thickness, whereas the pump is actually a whole different question. It's your own perception of the pump. How tight or how big or how swollen the muscle got after a specific exercise. And we do not actually have a study that looked at the pump. It looked at muscle swelling, and we have 3 studies. I think I've laid out, I think I discussed 3 studies in the post that kind of did find a somewhat did correlate acute swelling with longitudinal growth. There was the Hirona one paper from 2022, I think. And more recently, one conference abstract, and there was one more study. But the perception of pump and whether that correlates to swelling, we just don't know. It might, but we just do not know. And this is a really cool one. Like, this is one that gets my feathers, kind of like, I'd really want this to be done. I really want to do this one, like ASAP. And if anyone is listening and anyone wants to kind of fund the study or do the study, just feel hit me up, that'd be amazing. But in that post, I've laid out that if we actually wanted to know and validate whether the perception of the pump is a good proxy of hypertrophy, you would first have to kind of validate some kind of a scale, let's say visual analog scale, that it kind of reflects the pump well, your perception of the pump well, and then correlate that to the muscle swelling. So, and if you say, yeah, I had a 10 out of 10 pump, does that amount to the greatest amount of swelling? Cool. Then you have to do that and compare it with different exercises, like one exercise versus the other. Let's say it acutely, and then you repeat that and use one exercise versus the other acutely, and then run an intervention, one versus the other, 8 to 10 weeks, and see whether those acute swelling and acute perception of the pump actually corresponded to longitudinal growth that occurred with one exercise versus the other. And that might then allow you to say, yeah, perception of the pump is a good and can perhaps be a good predictor of hypertrophy, or at least swelling and hypertrophy. And yeah, in our paper, we didn't actually kind of objectively quantify this. We just asked the participants, like, okay, following each session, we do not have it written down. That's the caveat here. This is basically just off the cuff. But we asked the participants, hey, after a session, after each 5 sets of the leg extensions in both conditions, where do you feel the pump the most? And for at least half of them, the reported pump and the region of the pump was in proximal region of the mid thigh, and the one that grew the most. And that was just like my aha moment of like, fuck, we missed an opportunity to collect the data we kind of didn't plan. But it's a kind of just an interesting noise or interesting kind of observation that perhaps may drive future studies, and seeing, okay, let's test it out properly.
Yeah, man, I love this because, and I love that description of, a lot of people do equate pump to self-swelling, and it's like, oh yeah, the pump is, and the mechanism is self-swelling, but it's like, well, we actually don't know if when people experience high pumps, there's high self-swelling. Yeah. Like, we know there's papers with self-swelling, but we didn't ask them the pump. Yeah. There's no papers looking at the pump. So this is very interesting, but at least anecdotally, like you think about Arnold, but even anecdotally for myself and for clients, like people who get pumps really easily in certain muscles or even regions of muscles, typically it's really freaking well developed. Typically, not always. But coming actually back to my calves as an example, I never got a calf pump like ever. And then suddenly I was doing these lengthened partials and like pushing them hard. I was like, God damn, my calves can get crazy pumps.
Yeah.
So not to say like that's this anecdote, right? And this is where this whole question comes from, an anecdote from bodybuilders thinking about it for years. So I'd love someone to fund that study and look into it a bit more, because it's tough once you are advanced to kind of, we haven't got anything better really than like a pump and some disruption to the muscle, maybe some soreness as like short-term proxies for if we're doing something right.
Yeah, that'd be a really cool one to do. And hopefully, if not before Taka starts his data collection, that someone else will be inspired to kind of conduct and lead the way on this one. But yeah, there's some cool and research coming out from his lab, from Eric's lab in New Zealand that's that. So yeah, be on the lookout for that one. And for the Proxy paper, who knows? We'll see. There's a huge group of authors is in the final kind of project. So a lot of the well-known names that I think basically all of them were on the show before. So yeah.
Awesome. Dorian, thank you so much for your time. I'm definitely going to have to pull you back on for some more deep dives into some of these topics, because it's fascinating talking to you and getting your perspective on things. And as I've said already, if people aren't following you on Instagram, they definitely need to head over there. I'll link it up in the description so that people can head over and see the infographics you're laying out, because I think they're just a really refreshing take on science communication. And I think you're just doing a great job of making quite complex topics, very nuanced topics, kind of clear to understand, but not kind of there's no hidden agendas there. I'm not speaking that other people necessarily have them or anything. I'm not trying to point fingers at anyone. I'm just saying for you specifically, I think you're doing a grand job there. So thank you so much for your time. If people want to reach out to you, find out more about you, Dorian, I mentioned your Instagram, but is there anywhere else they should head?
No, I primarily operate on Instagram as of the moment. No YouTube. No. If they want to read studies, they can check out my either link in bios, and there's a link to ResearchGate, or just Google Scholar or ResearchGate for research. Or yeah, but basically Instagram is my primary social media for the time being.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that's linked in the description, your ResearchGate and your Instagram there. And guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.